You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
In 1860, deep in the sweltering jungles of Cambodia, a French naturalist hacked through vines, hunting exotic insects. But Henri Mouhot didn't find beetles that day. He stumbled on something that would rewrite history. Looming out of the green, stone towers and vast moats emerged. The remains of Angkor Wat, an ancient temple complex abandoned for centuries. Built 900 years ago, Angkor Wat is no crumbling ruin. It's one of the largest religious monuments ever made, a marvel of scale and precision. Its lotus-shaped towers pierce the sky, older than the great cathedrals of Europe. Crafted with stone blocks so precisely fitted, they rival what modern lasers could manage today. When word reached Europe, jaws dropped. No one expected to find a massive stone city hidden in a jungle. But who built it? Why here, so far from any coast, only to be swallowed by vines? At first, clues were scarce. Then a breakthrough. A Chinese diplomat's 13th century journal surfaced, describing a sprawling metropolis, its people, its rituals, a lost civilization. Now, new eyes and new tools dig deeper. Archaeologists have radar images taken from space. Those scans shattered old guesses. Angkor wasn't just a temple. It was a city the size of London, an ancient powerhouse hidden under roots and brush. Step inside its corridors and see endless walls carved with the longest bas-reliefs on Earth. Gods, warriors, dancers, each stone a page of Khmer history. The Khmer, Cambodia's ancient people, shaped an empire here, ruling from the 9th to 15th century. 38 kings ruled from Angkor, their reach stretching from southern Vietnam to Laos and beyond. At the heart of it stood King Suryavarman II, the Sun King. His ashes rest beneath the temple's central lotus tower. To the Khmer, Angkor Wat symbolized the mythical Mount Meru, home of Hindu gods. Its moat, the oceans encircling that sacred peak. When Mouhot wrote about Angkor, he called it grander than anything Greece or Rome left behind, a city more complex than Versailles, Notre Dame, and the Louvre combined. But to the few Buddhist monks who still lived there, the origins of Angkor were pure legend. Some believed the temple built itself. Word of Mouhot's find raced through Europe. Soon came explorers, photographers, and treasure hunters, all obsessed with the jungle city's secrets. But Mouhot never saw the full picture. An insect's bite ended his life within a year of his discovery. As others hacked away the vines, they uncovered more temples. Carvings covered every wall. Epic tales of battles, kings, and gods. Inscriptions in ancient Khmer and Sanskrit hinted at the city's purpose, a holy capital for a people who saw their kings as living gods. One French scholar, Georges Coedes, cracked the code. 7 thick volumes of translated inscriptions opened a window into Angkor's rise. 6 centuries as the Khmer capital, a realm that once reached the Mekong River, parts of Laos, and into Burma. Why build such splendor here? The puzzle deepened. That Chinese journal, written by Zhou Daguan in 1296, painted Angkor as a bustling city, larger than anyone imagined. Zhou described a metropolis teeming with trade, ceremony, and royal intrigue. But was it true? For a century, archaeologists debated whether his diary was fantasy or fact. Today, scientists have the evidence Zhou described. Satellite scans and muddy trenches reveal canals, roads, foundations, a city grid hidden beneath the roots. Bit by bit, Angkor's true scale comes into focus. A sophisticated urban center sustained by water and rice. A masterpiece of survival in the unforgiving tropics. Long before stone spires rose over the jungle, the Khmer people mastered something more powerful than stone: water. Cambodia's landscape swings between bone-dry drought and raging floods. The Khmer turned that chaos into an advantage. North of Angkor Wat, a wall 8 miles long encloses more than temples. It shields Angkor Thom, the Khmer's holy city, about the size of Manhattan. At its center stands the Bayon Temple, a surreal tower of carved faces that watch over the ancient capital. The Chinese envoy Zhou Daguan stayed here nearly a year. His diary captured details no one else did. Dancers, gold statues, crocodiles large as boats, firecrackers at royal festivals so loud they rattled the jungle. He described a capital buzzing with markets and processions, nobles and peasants, courtiers and slaves. Modern digs back him up. Deep under the tangle of roots, archaeologists like Jacques Gaucher plot thousands of coordinates. What's emerged is a blueprint of urban genius: canals, reservoirs, roads, wooden houses. When Mouhot found Angkor Wat, he guessed it was just one temple. Zhou's journal said otherwise, and the ground agrees. Angkor was a city built for hundreds of thousands. How many people lived there? Clues lie in the carvings. One temple alone, Ta Prohm, needed 12,000 caretakers, priests, dancers, servants. Multiply that by dozens of shrines and palaces, and the city's population rivals any medieval European capital. Yet Angkor wasn't like London or Paris, crowded inside walls. It was a hydraulic city, scattered across forests and paddies, connected by roads and water. Some call it a rural metropolis. Rice fields, farmhouses, hidden temples, a living grid hidden under green. This watery web kept Angkor alive. Cambodia's Great Lake, the Tonle Sap, swells 4 times its size in monsoon season, a natural reservoir brimming with fish. The Khmer built massive moats, canals, and artificial lakes called beres. Together they tamed floods, stored water for dry months, and fed rice fields that stretched beyond the horizon. Maintaining it all was a colossal task. Canals had to be clear, embankments strong, reservoirs dredged of silt. For 5 centuries, each new king inherited not just temples, but the fragile balance of the city's veins. Disrupt that flow, and Angkor would choke on its own brilliance. But at its peak, the system worked. It fed the people, floated sandstone blocks from distant hills, and moved rice and tribute to the king's palace. The same canals that watered paddies also carried trade: ivory, beeswax, bronze statues, bound for China and beyond. Zhou Daguan saw Chinese junks docked by Angkor's harbors, proof of the Khmer's place in a global network long before the word globalization existed. Beyond trade, water was power. Rulers like Jayavarman VII, the empire's great builder, covered the land with roads, bridges, and rest houses so pilgrims could travel safely. He reshaped rivers, redirected lakes, and planted shrines like mile markers across his domain. But the system's strength was also its flaw. Its precision left no margin for error. A king who failed to maintain the waterways risked more than drought. The whole city's survival hinged on keeping water flowing and faith alive. Jayavarman VII ruled at Angkor's high point from 1181 to 1219. Nicknamed the Great Builder King, he expanded the empire's borders wider than any ruler before him. He didn't just stack stones. He moved mountains, rivers, entire villages to shape the world in stone and water. He ordered roads that stretched for hundreds of miles. Along them, rest houses stood a day's journey apart, safe havens for pilgrims, traders, and officials. He raised hospitals and shrines, palaces and schools. But his crown jewel was the city's water grid, giant reservoirs linked by canals, an artificial artery keeping Angkor's heart pumping. Satellite images prove how sophisticated it was. Each barai, or reservoir, spanned miles. Some could hold as much water as a small lake. Elevated roads crossed over channels, which diverted floods and fed rice fields during dry spells. The royal palace itself hid secret reservoirs and stone dikes that funneled rain and floodwater exactly where needed. Archaeologist Jacques Gaucher once uncovered part of this lost plumbing. 2 massive basins, each the length of 3 football fields, stepped like terraces to manage the flow. Below the basins, stone tunnels channeled water under roads, an ancient feat of civil engineering. But this delicate balancing act had no backup. If canals clogged with silt, if a dam broke or a drought lingered too long, the whole network faltered. Still, for centuries, it worked. While Europe's peasants scraped by, Angkor's people grew enough rice to spare. Surplus rice fed temple workers and palace staff, stocked storehouses, and paid for art, bronze, gold, and dancers. Zhou Daguan wrote that the Khmer wove fine cloth, cast statues the size of elephants, traded exotic feathers and ivory, even gold Buddhas and bronze lions. He also wrote about the people, farmers, nobles, merchants, and their strange customs through foreign eyes. Zhou called the Khmer barbarians, yet he marveled at their wealth. He described women running markets while men worked the fields. He noted taxes paid in rice and fish, elephants used like trucks, crocodiles lurking near river docks. Women held power here. They owned land, led trade, even guarded the king's palace. Zhou recorded that Cambodian women were, in his words, highly sexed, gossip that probably said more about Zhou than the Khmer. He claimed they could discard a husband who failed to satisfy them, and that concubines and royal harems bound the provinces to the king's court like living political contracts. It all fed a social pyramid that rose straight to the god king. Zhou described royal audiences where the king appeared behind a golden window, flanked by wives and ministers. Nobles crawled forward on the marble floors, pressing foreheads to stone. Missing a ritual could bring disaster, a belief enforced by legend and fear. At its heart, Angkor was a city of devotion and display. Carvings of gods, demons, dancers, battles, and myths wrapped every shrine and corridor. Thousands of artisans spent decades chiseling these stories into sandstone, crafting the world's longest narrative reliefs. Religion and power were inseparable. To serve the king was to serve the divine. Yet hidden behind the splendor lay harsh truths. Some labor was voluntary, driven by faith. Much wasn't. Inscriptions speak of slaves, wild men from the hills, Zhou called them, bound to temples and palaces. Escape could mean mutilation or death. Punishments for crime were brutal. Thieves lost hands or feet, traitors buried alive. Through fear, faith, and force, Angkor's kings kept their water flowing, rice fields green, temples rising. But the same system that lifted this empire skyward would one day drag it back to earth. Even at its peak, Angkor sat on the edge of collapse, and few saw it coming. For 5 centuries, the Khmer engineered an empire out of jungle and swamp. But the same water that made Angkor rich was also its greatest gamble. Cambodia's climate is unforgiving. 8 months bone dry, then sudden monsoons flood fields and rivers. At first, the Khmer turned this chaos into stability, carving canals and reservoirs that stretched for miles, stacking stone embankments to channel floods and feed rice paddies. The Tonle Sap Lake, Southeast Asia's largest freshwater lake, swelled 4 times its size each year, a natural safety valve that kept the empire fed. Yet this system needed constant care, dredging canals, rebuilding banks, clearing silt. Neglect it for one season, and disaster lurked. After Jayavarman VII, the empire's great builder king, later rulers grew less obsessed with water. Fewer new berets appeared, old ones clogged, forests were stripped to make way for more rice fields, which made erosion worse. Silt choked the canals faster than they could be cleared. At the same time, new threats crept closer. To the east, the Vietnamese kingdom of Champa was a sworn enemy for centuries. Temple walls are carved with scenes of epic battles, war elephants charging through tropical heat, Khmer soldiers clashing with Cham warriors in jungle skirmishes. By the 13th century, a new force rose to the west, the Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya. Zhou Daguan noted that entire villages had been wiped out in wars with the Siamese. He wasn't impressed by Angkor's defenses. He mocked Khmer soldiers as barefoot men with no armor, no helmets, and no bows, only spears and shields. A city built to channel water and worship gods was not built to fend off a modern army. When Ayutthaya struck in 1431, the blow was final. The Siamese army breached Angkor's weakened defenses, looted its treasures, burned its palaces, and hauled away captives, including the king's entire harem, back to Thailand. With the court gone and the water system broken, the jungle crept back, vines and trees reclaiming temples stone by stone. Some scholars say the empire's real downfall wasn't just war, but belief. The early Khmer kings ruled as god kings, lay, living gods on earth, merging Hindu deities with their own divine status. Jayavarman VII shifted the state religion to Buddhism, a more compassionate faith that rejected divine kingship. Some historians think this softer creed undercut the old iron grip. Peasants no longer feared the king as an angry god demanding constant tribute and labor. Without that fear, maintenance slowed, the canals clogged, and the city starved itself. Deforestation only made things worse. Chopped forests left slopes bare, rivers flooded unpredictably. Erosion dumped mud into the vital arteries of Angkor's reservoirs. One break in the chain led to another. Water clogged, rice yields fell, farmers fled, tribute dried up, priests drifted away. The king's power crumbled alongside the silted canals. When the Siamese army finally arrived, Angkor was already staggering under its own weight. It didn't fall in a single night of battle. It faded out, its population slipping away to the east. By the 1500s, the once mighty Khmer court had re-established itself on the banks of the Mekong River, near Cambodia's modern capital Phnom Penh. They never rebuilt Angkor. But the story didn't end with total ruin. The Khmer never vanished. They became the ancestors of modern Cambodia, no longer god kings demanding temples, but still proud keepers of Angkor's memory. When Angkor fell silent, the jungle did what jungles do best. It erased the lines humans drew. For nearly 4 centuries, Angkor Wat and its sister temples stood hidden behind walls of roots and strangler figs, guarded only by the buzzing of insects and the occasional monk who refused to leave. Local legends whispered that the temples built themselves, or had always been there, untouched by time. A handful of Buddhist monks tended small shrines within the vast courtyards, but few knew who carved the walls or shaped the towers like lotus petals rising to the sky. In Europe, Angkor was all but forgotten until that fateful swing of Henri Mouhot's machete in 1860. When word spread of a lost stone city in Southeast Asia, Western explorers packed up cameras and sketchbooks and set sail east, hungry to claim discovery of something the Khmer had never truly lost. Early French archaeologists found the place in ruin. Stones scattered, walls collapsed under roots thicker than a man's waist. Some temples were buried under centuries of fallen leaves and shifting soil. For decades, the French poured money and manpower into restoration. They reassembled entire buildings piece by piece, like colossal stone puzzles. By the early 1900s, a clearer picture emerged. Angkor wasn't just a temple, but a monumental religious capital. Archaeologist Bernard-Philippe Groslier compared it to finding Versailles, the Place de la Concorde, and the Louvre thrown together inside Paris, surrounded by Gothic cathedrals and medieval churches. The scale stunned anyone who visited, and the deeper they dug, the bigger the city grew. Yet the work was far from safe. In the 1970s, Cambodia plunged into nightmare under Pol Pot's brutal Khmer Rouge regime. Archaeology stopped overnight. Jungle paths turned deadly, seeded with landmines. For years, the temples stood in silence again, too dangerous to touch. When the country found peace decades later, archaeologists returned, shovels in hand, ready to pick up where their predecessors had left off. This time, they didn't come alone. Satellites, radar, and high-tech scanners gave them a new view of the old city. NASA's space shuttle Endeavour, in a rare mission in 1994, carried a radar system designed to pierce jungle canopy. When it flew over Cambodia, the images it sent back redefined everything. What looked like empty forest was actually a hidden blueprint. Thousands of straight lines etched into the earth, proof of canals, roads, embankments, and small shrines that had vanished from sight centuries ago. For the first time, Angkor's true sprawl became visible, a rural metropolis spread across an area bigger than modern London. Hidden beneath trees were thousands of temple mounds, village sites, and irrigation grids that stitched the city together. Some temples were tiny, the size of a village church in medieval Europe, but each marked the heart of a local community linked back to Angkor Thom, the royal core. Field teams, led by researchers like Christophe Patier, used the radar maps as treasure maps. They slogged through dense forest, machetes, and GPS in hand, uncovering forgotten shrines and sandstone statues half buried under roots and termite mounds. Every new find was proof that Angkor wasn't a single ruin swallowed by time. It was an urban web that once hummed with life. Each hidden shrine hints at how Angkor worked. Farmers who lived miles away from the king's palace still answered to him through temples like these. Inscriptions show that thousands of villagers were assigned to maintain the central shrines, their rice and fish flowing down the roads and canals like tribute veins feeding the city's heart. Piece by piece, this buried map tells the same truth. Henri Mouhot guessed when he first stumbled into Angkor Wat. This was never just one temple. It was the capital of a civilization that once ruled Southeast Asia with stone, water, and faith. With each radar sweep and muddy trench, Angkor's hidden blueprint keeps growing clearer. But the real secret lies in how this sprawl actually functioned day to day. The Khmer didn't just build temples and houses at random. Their villages were woven into the master plan. Canals linked paddies to reservoirs. Roads threaded temples to markets. Shrines anchored small communities to the empire's spiritual core. Each village shrine worked like a micro-hub, a place for worship, trade, and tribute. In Europe, think village churches ringing bells for local farmers. In Angkor, these shrines did more. They were living proof that the people belonged to the king. Inscriptions confirm it. One ancient stone record orders 80,000 people from 3,000 villages to supply Angkor's main temples every year, delivering rice, fish, oil, cloth, livestock, dancers, and priests. Everything flowed along the watery arteries that crisscrossed the jungle. French archaeologist Charles Hyam puts it bluntly, All this movement of tribute and manpower meant Angkor was the best organized rural metropolis of its time. And that network depended on the roads and canals that Jayavarman VII and his ancestors had carved into the earth. Jayavarman wasn't just obsessed with monuments. He was obsessed with connection. He ordered highways to span his kingdom, linking far-off rice paddies to the stone spires at Angkor Thom. He installed rest houses along these roads, spaced a day's walk apart, so pilgrims, officials, and traders could move safely under royal protection. The scale of this system is no fairy tale. The inscriptions match the satellite scans. When researchers plot radar data over the jungle, those old roads appear as dead straight lines, weaving villages into Angkor's orbit. It's all tied to one truth. The Khmer knew that controlling water and roads was more important than building bigger walls. With the canals and highways open, the king could gather tribute, feed thousands of temple workers, and keep power flowing back to his stone throne. But all this came at a cost. Manpower. Temples didn't carve themselves. Canals didn't dredge themselves. Slaves, conscripts, and free villagers alike spent months clearing silt, hauling stone, and cutting trees. Zhou Daguan's diary captured glimpses of that labor force. Slaves bought from mountain tribes, forced to work under threat of mutilation, or worse if they tried to escape. Yet the Khmer also believed they served a god king. Many toiled willingly, convinced their sweat built a stairway to heaven. Temples modeled on Mount Meru, the mythical Hindu home of the gods, turned rice and sandstone into spiritual insurance. Labor now, salvation later. By any measure, the Khmer's water system dwarfed anything in medieval Europe. While Dutch engineers in the 17th century were still learning to drain their soggy fields, the Khmer had already mastered vast canals, reservoirs, and floodgates 700 years earlier. The scale is staggering. One main reservoir, the West Barai, is 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. It could hold as much water as modern city dams. Smaller tanks and ponds fed rice fields, filled village moats, and watered royal gardens. But this precision made Angkor fragile. If the king's reach slipped, if villagers stopped dredging canals or storms dumped more silt than they could clear, the whole system cracked under its own brilliance. When it failed fast, turning farmland into swamp or desert in a single bad season. At its height, the water worked like a circulatory system, feeding one of the largest cities the world had ever seen. But the same life force would one day speed Angkor's decline, just as surely as any invading army. By the 13th century, the fine balance Angkor depended on began to tip. For generations, the Khmer had expanded their rice fields by cutting back forests, pushing canals deeper into the jungle. That ambition came with a hidden tax: erosion. Each rainy season, stripped hills dumped mud into the canals that once kept paddies watered. Silt built up faster than villagers could dredge it. Reservoirs clogged, water overflowed where it shouldn't, fields dried up where they shouldn't. A system that had made Angkor the envy of the medieval world was now its weakest link. Satellite scans today reveal abandoned channels, half-finished reservoirs, and half-choked moats, signs of desperate last-ditch fixes. It's like seeing bandages on a body too big to heal. Archaeologist Christophe Potier calls it ultra-sophistication turned fragile. The very brilliance that built Angkor planted the seeds of its collapse. But water wasn't the only crack in the foundation. The shift from Hinduism to Buddhism reshaped the Khmer mindset. Early kings were living gods on earth, divine incarnations commanding temples and armies with an iron will. Jayavarman VII changed that story, embracing Mahayana Buddhism, a softer creed that asked more for compassion than conquest. Some historians argue that this religious shift eroded the king's grip. No more fierce god kings demanding temple labor at all costs. Instead, new rulers turned inward, funding peaceful monasteries and hospitals instead of massive barrays and city walls. Meanwhile, new enemies sniffed weakness. The Siamese, once tributaries to the Khmer, grew strong enough to become rivals. In 1431, the Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya stormed Angkor Thom. Records say they looted the palaces, enslaved courtiers and the royal harem, then left the once mighty capital exposed like a gutted temple. But war alone didn't bury Angkor. The real exodus was slow. Thousands of villagers drifted eastward, away from clogged canals and failed crops, toward the Mekong River's steady flow. The Khmer court moved too, building a new base near what's now Phnom Penh. No single event erased Angkor. It wasn't wiped out overnight like Pompeii under ash or Troy under siege. It just withered, starved of water, drained of labor, wrapped in vines that pulled at the sandstone until temples cracked under their own weight. What the Siamese didn't burn, the jungle reclaimed. And so Angkor slid into legend, an entire city hidden under roots and leaves, its towers home to bats and whispering monks who guarded memories nobody else could read. Yet even at its lowest, Angkor was never truly abandoned. Local villagers still prayed at old shrines. Monks tended tiny altars tucked inside crumbling sanctuaries. Generations kept the stories alive, enough so that when Henri Mouhot hacked through the brush in 1860, the temples were waiting to be remembered. And that rediscovery was just the start. Once the West woke up to Angkor, archaeologists, treasure hunters, and dreamers poured in, determined to map what the jungle had hidden for centuries. When Henri Mouhot's writings hit Europe, they ignited a wave of obsession that spread faster than any explorer could travel. The idea that a forgotten city rivaling Greece and Rome lay buried in the Cambodian jungle fired imaginations from Paris to London. Early French expeditions arrived with notebooks and sketchpads, hacking away vines to clear the monumental corridors Mouhot described. Some came to study. Others came to strip statues, carvings, and artifacts for European museums. For decades, Angkor was both a wonder and a plunder, a stone trophy for Western colonial powers hungry to stamp their flags on the ruins of ancient greatness. Yet not all who came to Angkor were looters. Some were the first generation of serious archaeologists, men like Bernard Philippe Groslier. In the mid-20th century, Groslier saw Angkor not just as temples frozen in time, but as a living puzzle. He argued Angkor wasn't just a cluster of shrines, it was a city, a system, a machine. He called it a hydraulic cities, powered by water and rice, sustained by a network that extended far beyond the stone towers. That idea turned out to be right, but proving it took tools Groslier never had. When the Khmer Rouge regime cut Cambodia off from the world, the puzzle went dark again. The temples lay under landmines and soldiers. Conservation stopped. Scholars fled or vanished. By the 1990s, when Cambodia finally found some stability, the next generation of archaeologists returned, armed not just with spades, but with satellites and lasers. NASA's Space Shuttle Endeavour changed the game. In 1994, its radar snapped images through the jungle canopy that no explorer on foot could ever see. Those ghostly maps revealed straight lines, roads and canals that the vines had hidden for centuries. Later, LIDAR, laser imaging that bounces signals off the ground, painted an even clearer picture. Entire neighborhoods, massive reservoirs, grand causeways connecting hundreds of outlying temples. Each discovery added more weight to Groslier's hunch. Angkor was never just a handful of grand temples ringed by rice paddies. It was a metropolis, scattered and rural yet meticulously engineered. From the city core to the farthest beret, everything was connected by water and faith. On the ground, teams like Christophe Potier's chased the LIDAR maps with machetes and GPS trackers. What they found matched the ghostly lines perfectly. Collapsed shrines under termite mounds, half-buried guardian statues cracked by roots, brick walls covered in moss. Each was once the heart of a village that owed rice and labor to the royal city. Some temples were grand stone sanctuaries. Others were humble towers that looked more like village churches, places where local farmers prayed, paid taxes in rice or fish, and stayed linked to the divine power at Angkor Thom. These shrines anchored families to the king's vast economic web, binding faith and tribute into one system. As this map reemerged, it became clear. The ancient Khmer built one of the largest pre-industrial cities ever recorded, bigger than medieval Paris, more complex than any contemporary capital in Europe or the Americas at that time. Yet these hidden shrines and broken canals don't just whisper about greatness. They reveal the risk behind it. Each fragment hints at what happens when that vast, delicate web unravels. The same roads that once brought tribute could become forgotten trails swallowed by vines when the center could no longer hold. Even today, teams find new pieces. Each excavation adds one more point to the old puzzle, proving that Angkor's story is far from finished. From satellites in orbit to trenches in mud, the city that was once lost to the jungle is slowly stepping back into the sun. Every new fragment uncovered in Angkor's sprawl peels back another layer of how this jungle metropolis truly lived and breathed. It wasn't just grand causeways and holy towers. It was everyday life on a monumental scale. Archaeologists piece it together from clues buried in ponds and canals, rice husks trapped in ancient mud, pollen grains preserved for centuries, seeds that whisper which crops fed the masses. The picture that emerges shows an empire that turned wet, swampy ground into an agricultural engine powerful enough to feed nearly 1 million people. The Tonle Sap Lake was Angkor's lifeline. During the monsoon, the lake swelled, reversing the flow of rivers and flooding vast areas with nutrient-rich water. When the waters receded, they left behind fertile land perfect for rice paddies. The Khmer engineered this natural cycle into something massive, an annual rice surplus that bankrolled temples, statues, bronze Buddhas, royal palaces, and armies. Fish were just as crucial. Zhou Daguan wrote of prawns the size of a man's forearm, black carp so abundant nets bulged with them, and crocodiles as big as boats lurking in muddy channels. Fish and rice powered the workforce that carved bas-reliefs and stacked stones into towers shaped like lotus buds. Water didn't just grow crops, it moved them. Barges glided down canals heavy with rice, fruit, fish, and spices. Stones from quarries in the Kulin Hills, 50 kilometers away, floated to temple sites on rafts. The Khmer turned their entire landscape into a production line. Quarry, canal, reservoir, paddy field, temple, all woven together by water. Maintaining this system demanded sweat and faith. Charles Hyam and his peers describe entire villages dedicated to feeding and serving a single temple. Inscribed records list thousands of officials, dancers, porters, and priests tied to these stone monuments. One temple, Ta Prohm, alone supported 12,000 people, including 650 dancers who performed sacred routines to keep the gods, and by extension the king's power, satisfied. This same system made Angkor not just powerful, but wealthy. The Khmer traded ivory, beeswax, bronze, gold, kingfisher feathers, and rare woods. Chinese merchants came for spices and silks. Khmer traders sent ships downriver with rice and fish. Zhou Daguan noted that Chinese settlers married local women, partly for love, partly for business, since Khmer women ran the markets and controlled trade. Inside Angkor's royal enclave, life was a dance of ritual and power. Zhou described a hierarchy of ministers, generals, astrologers, scribes, all stacked beneath the king, who lived not just as ruler, but as a living link between heaven and earth. Audiences with the king were acts of theater. Courtiers prostrated themselves on cool stone floors. Offerings of gold and rice were laid at the lotus towers. The king appeared behind golden windows to remind everyone who commanded both the water and the gods. Yet all this pageantry hid a harsher truth. For those at the bottom, laborers dredging silt, slaves hauling sandstone blocks, life was anything but paradise. Punishments for rebellion were savage. Thieves lost hands, traitors lost noses, or were buried alive in pits outside the city walls. In the world's largest religious monument, the same stone that lifted prayers skyward also demanded brutal order. This was Angkor's double edge, an empire where faith built towers, but fear held them standing, where an engineering miracle fed a city that looked like a dream but ran on unrelenting human labor. And under all of it flowed the water, the empire's true heartbeat. When that heartbeat skipped, even the greatest towers of stone couldn't stand forever. By the time the 15th century dawned, Angkor's heartbeat was faltering for good. The Khmer's intricate waterworks, canals, reservoirs, dikes, once the envy of the ancient world, began to crumble under neglect and nature's pushback. Decades of overambitious expansion stripped forests bare to make room for new rice paddies. Without roots to hold soil in place, monsoon rains turned slopes into rivers of mud. That mud clogged canals faster than thousands of villagers with baskets could clear. The reservoirs, once vast enough to look like lakes from the temple towers, silted up, their storage shrinking with each passing year. Zhou Daguan never saw this final slide, but his diary hints at its seeds. A capital brimming with people but stretched thin by its own complexity. Maintaining Angkor's massive infrastructure demanded a disciplined, centralized authority, the God-King model that early rulers wielded so well. But when Jayavarman VII shifted the kingdom's spiritual core to Buddhism, the divine hammer that once drove this labor began to soften. Buddhism encouraged mercy, compassion, and letting go of earthly power. Good for souls, bad for giant public works. Priests and peasants who once offered sweat and stone for a Hindu god king were suddenly less bound to that chain. Temples shifted from colossal to modest. Grand projects slowed to a trickle. The city's veins clogged. Meanwhile, external threats loomed larger. The Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya grew into a formidable rival to the west. Emboldened by Khmer weakness, they struck when Angkor's walls and watchtowers were least prepared. In 1431, they did what the Cham had tried before. They stormed Angkor Thom, looted its treasures, enslaved the royal court, and left smoking ruins behind them. But even conquest didn't finish Angkor overnight. Its downfall dragged on, slow and ragged like vines reclaiming a stone wall one root at a time. After the Siamese blow, the royal court shifted east to the Mekong River, closer to fertile floodplains that didn't need canals on the same scale. Phnom Penh emerged as the new royal hub, smaller, more defensible, easier to supply. Back at Angkor, the temples stayed, but they were empty of kings and courtly parades. Village families stayed too, eking out harvests in the shadows of lotus towers, tending shrines that held local spirits long after royal rituals faded. Buddhist monks made the hollow halls their sanctuaries, chanting prayers where once royal dancers performed for the god kings. In Europe, explorers and early colonial powers spun tales that Angkor vanished into the jungle. The truth is more grounded. The people never disappeared. They just moved. The temples never became tombs for ghosts. They stayed alive in small ways. Monks chanting, villagers laying rice at doorsteps, stories passing from generation to generation about a time when stone spires touched the gods. Centuries later, when the French arrived with cameras, pencils, and grand dreams of excavation, they didn't discover Angkor. They uncovered it. Locals had always known the temples were there. They prayed there. They fished the same old canals that once fed a million mouths. Yet for the rest of the world, Angkor reappeared like a myth made real. A jungle Atlantis with carved gods watching silently from the shadows. Each cracked relief and vine-wrapped tower stood as proof that the Khmer once ruled with brilliance, ambition, and a mastery of water that few civilizations have matched. And even now, every radar sweep, every muddy trench, keeps revealing how much more the jungle still guards. Modern archaeology at Angkor is a testament to how the past and present still collide in Cambodia's sacred heart. For all the legends and grandeur, Angkor is no frozen museum piece. It's a living reminder of what human ambition can build and what nature can reclaim. In recent decades, teams armed with LIDAR, laser scanning from the air, have shown just how vast the old city really was. Those invisible maps cut through the jungle canopy to reveal grids of buried roads, mounds where wooden houses once stood, half-forgotten shrines now reduced to lumps of brick and moss. On the ground, Cambodian experts work alongside international archaeologists to trace what the scans suggest. Machetes slash through thorny undergrowth, GPS devices pin each new find to a digital map, and bits of pottery or brick get bagged and tagged for carbon dating back at labs. Every discovery confirms the same truth. Angkor wasn't just a temple complex for kings and priests. It was a city where tens of thousands of ordinary people farmed rice, worshipped ancestors, fetched water, traded fish, and raised families under the watchful gaze of lotus towers. Some of the most remarkable finds lie far from Angkor Wat itself, the outlying temples scattered through the forest like waypoints in a vanished network. A humble sandstone carving half swallowed by roots might mark a place where a village priest once led daily prayers. A broken reservoir, long since dry, shows where a community's water supply faltered when the great canals clogged. Each piece ties back to that same ancient lifeline, water. Without it, nothing about Angkor makes sense. With it, the city bloomed in a place no sensible engineer today would ever choose for an urban capital. It's why the Khmer legacy still resonates with modern planners and engineers. Long before Amsterdam's dikes or China's giant hoe projects, the Khmer figured out how to bend the flood and drought cycle to human needs, building reservoirs big enough to feed hundreds of thousands through brutal dry months. Their technology didn't run on steam engines or electricity. It ran on faith, manpower, and sheer ingenious design. Yet the water's double edge is the core lesson. The same canals that fed millions turned deadly when neglected. Without maintenance, the system collapsed under silt and sediment. Overexploitation of the forest made the cycle worse, pouring more mud into delicate channels that once fed fields as far as the eye could see. Today, Standing on the causeways that cross Angkor's old moats, the ruins look timeless, but the deeper truth is they're fragile. Tree roots pry apart sandstone blocks. Heavy rains wear down old carvings faster than any war ever did. And mass tourism brings new threats. Millions of footsteps vibrating through foundations never meant to bear this weight forever. Cambodia's archaeologists know that preserving Angkor means more than keeping temples upright. It means balancing access and respect, sharing the site's story with the world, while ensuring the jungle doesn't reclaim what took centuries to build and decades to reveal again. Yet for the Khmer people today, Angkor is more than a relic. It's a symbol of resilience. Cambodia's modern flag carries Angkor Wat on it, a reminder that no empire is truly lost if its story is remembered, told, and still standing against the creeping vines. In the end, Angkor's silent towers echo the same lesson their builders left carved in endless corridors. What humans can dream, they can build, but they must keep tending it, or the jungle takes it back, stone by stone. So Angkor stands, a testament carved in sandstone, half claimed by jungle, fully claimed by history. What started as one king's mausoleum grew into a spiritual beacon, an engineering marvel, and a lesson in how brilliance can buckle under its own weight. Today, monks still chant in shadowed corridors where royal dancers once stepped barefoot across polished stone. Local families bring offerings of rice and flowers where generals once plotted battles and scribes etched Sanskrit prayers into walls. For tourists, it's a wonder of the world. For Cambodians, it's the spine of their identity. What sets Angkor apart isn't just its scale or beauty. It's that it pushed the limits of what a pre-industrial society could do with what it had. No iron, no steam engines, no fossil fuels. Just sandstone, sweat, rice, and a belief that human hands could build paradise on Earth if they mastered water and stone. Its story carries a hard lesson. The same water that made Angkor great destroyed it when rulers lost their grip on maintenance, when forests vanished, when canals silted up faster than villagers could dig. When the king's divine status slipped and faith shifted, the will to keep the lifelines clear faded too. War delivered the final blows. The Siamese invasions, the loss of the royal court, the city abandoned for the more fertile, easier-to-defend banks of the Mekong. But even then, Angkor never disappeared. It lingered in local memory, lived on in whispered legends and half-lit shrines, until Henri Mouhot stumbled through vines in 1860 and reminded the world what the Khmer had once achieved. Today's LIDAR maps, satellite scans, and muddy trenches keep rewriting the old guesswork. Each scan reveals more buried reservoirs, broken temples, and hints that this metropolis was even bigger than early dreamers suspected. Each discovery deepens Angkor's paradox. It was a city designed to outlast time, yet it crumbled into silence when the balance that fed it broke. Yet for all its collapse, Angkor is still here. Living proof that ingenuity can push human possibility to breathtaking heights. And a reminder that if we stop tending what we build, the vines are always waiting.